Good morning. This morning we're going to be reading chapter 11 in The Mouse and the Motorcycle. So where we left off last week on chapter 10 was Keith was sick and had a really bad fever, and so Ralph is heading out to try and find an aspirin for him to help him make him feel better. So today's chapter 11 is called The Search. I have to go out into the hotel, Ralph informed his relatives. I've got to go help the boy. Oh no, not into the hotel, cried his mother. Not while the housekeeper is looking for mice. If you're seen, you'll be in danger for sure. I'll be back before dawn, said Ralph staunchly. I must go. Don't try and stop me. See here, my boy, you aren't you being a bit dramatic? Asked Uncle Lester. Whatever do you have to do to go out into the hotel for? I need to find a pill, said Ralph. An aspirin tablet. His answer was dramatic enough for even his Uncle Lester. His entire family stared at him in disbelief. Not an aspirin. Not after his own father had been poisoned by one of the very same dreaded tablets. An aspirin? His mother gasped. No, Ralph, not that. Anything but that. It is the only way. Ralph stood tall and brave. The boy has a fever, and he needs an aspirin. I have to go find him one. Oh, Ralph. His mother hid her face in her paws. But Ralph and Sissy, remember, your father, you can't carry an aspirin in your cheek pouches. It will poison you. How could you get one in here? I'll find a way. Ralph was outwardly steadfast in his determination. But inside, he wondered how he would manage to get an aspirin into the room. If he did find one, I guess he could roll it, perhaps. Ralph, stay here, pleaded his mother. You're too young. Let your Uncle Lester go. Well, now, let's just talk this over, said his Uncle Lester. I'm not too young, and I haven't had a moment to lose. Ralph, who was really frightened by what he was about to do, also enjoyed the drama of the moment. Goodbye. I shall return before dawn. Ralph, promise me you'll be careful, pleaded his mother. Promise me you won't climb into a suitcase like your Aunt Adrian. Ralph's Aunt Adrian, who liked nice things, had climbed into a suitcase to examine a nylon stocking. Someone had closed the suitcase, and Aunt Adrian had never been seen again. It was hoped that she had been carried away to a life of luxury. Promise me, Ralph, said his mother, but her son was already out the knot hole. Ralph scurried along the carpet of room 215, flattened himself, and squeezed under the door. Once out in the hallway, his courage ebbed. The aspirin tablet seemed a very small thing to find in such a very big place. It would be much easier to find the motorcycle. No, thought Ralph. I must not even think about that motorcycle. Ralph began to feel pretty small himself, much smaller than he had felt during his show of bravery back in the mouse nest. Down in the lobby, a clock struck 1. There was not a moment to lose. He ran to the next room, squeezed under the doors, searched under the beds, under the dressers, while the two guests slept soundly. All he found was a bobby pin. He skipped room 211 because his enemy, the terrier, was still in there, and ran on to room 209. A hurried search, frightening because of the loud, uneven snoring that came from one of the beds, revealed nothing but a few pretzel crumbs, which Ralph did not have time to eat. On and on he ran, down the halls, under the doors, under the beds, the dressers. There was not a single aspirin tablet to be found. If one of the rooms he did see a penny that was rolled under the luggage rack, and he remembered his mother's wish to leave a tip for room service. But tonight, he had no time for pennies. He must press on and find an aspirin. A small doubt began to creep into Ralph's thoughts as he ran down the hall and last to the last room. Maybe there was no aspirin. Maybe he was risking his lives and the lives of his family for nothing. But Ralph pushed the thought out and aside. He would not let himself become discouraged. If there was no aspirin on the second floor, there had to be one someplace on the ground floor. Tonight, he was willing to brave the stairs to find it. He flattened himself, squeezed under the last door on the second floor. Nothing. There was no sound but the rattle of the windows in the wind. Ralph started across the carpet towards the dresser, and suddenly a light from the bedside table blinded him. He stopped. He rooted around the carpet in fear. Even though he was not likely that anyone was going to cut off his tail with a carving knife, he heard someone slip out of bed and utter a sound halfway between a squeal and a scream. Before Ralph knew it, what was happening, An ordinary drinking glass, had been clamped down over him, and he stood there trapped. By then, his eyes were adjusting to the light, and he found himself facing some bare feet. Looking up, he saw the feet belonged to a young woman in a pink nightgown. "Mary Lou, wake up," she whispered to the young woman in the other bed. "Look what I caught." "Huh," said Mary Lou, blinking and raising up one eyebrow. Her hair was done up in pink rollers. "Betty, are you out of your mind? It's past 1 o'clock in the morning." The night was slipping by, much too quickly for this mouse to be trapped. He was terrified, and he was desperate. No one in his family had ever been trapped under a glass before. Worst of all, he was failing Keith and endangering his family. "Wake up, Mary Lou," insisted Betty. "I was getting up to stop the rattling from the window and caught a mouse." This news roused Mary Lou from bed, and the two young women knelt on the carpet and looked at Ralph, who promptly turned his back. He did not care for being stared at in his misery. It was no use. The woman moved around to the other side of the glass. "Isn't he darling? Just look at his little paws and his little ears. Aren't they so sweet?" It was disgusting. It was bad enough to be trapped and stared at, but then to have a pair of them carrying on in gushing fashion was almost more than he could stomach. Cunning little paws indeed. They were strong paws for grasping the handle grips of a motorcycle. "Oh, Betty, do you suppose we could take him back to Wichita with us? My third grade class would love him." "So would my kindergarten class," agreed Betty. "We could keep him in a cage on the ledge, and all the children could bring food from home to feed him. It would be such a good experience for them to have a pet in the classroom." "Well," thought Ralph grimly, "I've always wanted to travel." A cage in a kindergarten room in Wichita, however, was not exactly what he had in mind. The minutes were slipping by dangerously fast. He had to do something. "Look," he shouted through the glass breastplate. "Let me go. Please, please, there's something terribly important I have to do." "He squeaked," marveled Betty. "He is so adorable," squeaked Mary Lou. It was no use. The young woman could not speak his language. Ralph was in despair. He thought of Keith tossing feverishly in his bed, and his family huddled in the mouse nest waiting for his return. "But I don't see how we could take him back to Wichita," Betty said sensibly. "We're driving from San Francisco, then to Disneyland before we start back. How could we carry him thousands of miles?" The two teachers looked thoughtfully at Ralph, who knew his fate depended on their decision. He was to be carried to Disneyland and eventually to a ledge in a kindergarten room, or they would let him go. A third possibility crossed his mind. Perhaps they would leave him under the glass for the housekeeper to see. He hoped not. He did not think he could last that long. Already inside the glass was beginning to feel warm and airless. "I suppose we really shouldn't turn him loose in the hotel. Mice are pests, even though they're cute." The teacher not only destroyed Ralph's hopes, but she hurt his feelings, calling him a pest when he was on errand of mercy. From the mouse's point of view, the teachers were pests. "I know," exclaimed Betty suddenly, causing Ralph to look over his shoulder for a clue as to what she knew. "I know. We can get rid of him out without hurting him." The young teacher reached over the bedside table. She picked up a picture postcard, and she slid it under the glass and under his feet, so he was now standing on the postcard. He noticed the picture was of a giant redwood tree, the same postcard all travelers brought here when they came to California. "Now what are you going to do?" asked Mary Lou. "Watch." Betty carefully lifted the postcard and Ralph in the glass and walked across the room. Even though he knew it was useless, Ralph scrambled around in his tiny prison. He was afraid she was taking him towards the wash basin. He had heard of mice being drowned by people who didn't like trapping them. The teacher walked not to the wash basin, but to the open window. She held Ralph across the sill, removed the postcard from the glass, gave a little jerk, and shook Ralph off into the vines that grew up the side of the building. "There," she said, and closed the window, leaving Ralph hanging onto the vine above the ground.